The sea has a strange voice at night. It sighs through the cracks of old wood, carries the salt of every forgotten word. I used to love that sound. It meant home. But tonight, it sounds like chains. The air smells of damp pine and rusted nails. Wind slips through the broken shutters and the light from the porch. My porch shakes faintly against the wall like a dying heart. This house once held laughter books, the rhythm of a child's footsteps chasing dreams. Now it holds only me. And him. Daniel's cologne still lingers, that sharp, cold sweetness that pretends to be warmth. He stood right where I am standing, between me and the door. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You won't leave here until you sign." That's what he said. Simple, final, as if a sentence could cage a woman. I remember the sound of the lock, a clean, deliberate click, then the soft fall of silence. My phone on the floor, its glass broken like my own reflection. Only the clock kept moving, ticking in mockery of the heartbeat I couldn't steady. I sat on the floor for a long while, wood beneath my palms, cold and uneven, the smell of the sea pressing against the window, and I whispered almost without breath, "After all I've given, this is how I'm thanked." The words hung there like smoke, refusing to fade. He had always liked to teach me lessons, how to use my own money, how to speak at the table, how to modernize my mind. A gentleman's cruelty wrapped in charm. He never shouted. No, Daniel preferred the soft knives, the kind you don't notice until you bleed. Grace thought he was thoughtful. She'd smile at me, her eyes half pleading, "Mom, he just cares too much. Don't take it the wrong way." So I stopped speaking. Because when a mother warns too often, her voice becomes an echo no one hears. Tonight, that silence has turned into a cage. I walk to the window. The glass fogs with my breath. Outside, the ocean folds itself in darkness, the same ocean where Grace and I once built sandcastles, believing we could keep the tide from touching us. She was 6 then. I remember her dress, the pink one I made by hand, stitch by stitch under the yellow lamp. She'd twirl in it, laughing like wind chimes in summer. The hem was uneven, but she said it made her special. Only special people remember where they came from. That's what I told her. Now I wonder if she ever did. The floorboards creak under my steps. I trace the grain of the old wood with my fingers as if I could read the years hidden beneath the varnish. This was my classroom, once my home, my sanctuary. I taught literature in this very town for more than 20 years. Words were my companions, Austen Whitman Dickinson, souls who believed silence had meaning. Maybe that's why I didn't scream when Daniel locked the door, because silence remembers. He thinks I'm weak, an old woman too gentle to fight. He forgets I've raised a child through poverty, buried a husband, and taught generations of teenagers to question every line they read. I know manipulation when I see it. It wears a smile. It signs its name neatly on paper. He left that paper on the table, a legal document printed clean, asking for my signature to transfer ownership for tax efficiency. That's what he called it, efficiency. He said I could live here as long as I wanted, but I know what as long as means in a man's mouth. It means until I become inconvenient, until my memory is worth less than the land I stand on. The wind moans again, rattling the hinges like the whisper of ghosts. I sit at the small writing desk near the window, run my thumb along the edge of an old photograph, Grace, age 7, wearing that pink dress, her smile wider than the horizon. I press the picture against my chest. "Grace," I whisper, "I kept the light on for you." I close my eyes and breathe. The room is not just a prison, it's a witness. Every nail, every crack in the wall knows the story of how love turns into control. I wonder when Daniel started planning this. Was it the day he convinced her to merge our accounts, or the evening he toasted to a future built on trust? The word trust tastes bitter now, like salt in an open wound. A sound. Outside, maybe footsteps. For a moment, I think it's Grace. But no. Daniel's car engine fades into the distance. He's gone. He thinks I'll sit here until I surrender. He doesn't know I've spent a lifetime surviving quiet rooms. I move to the old bookshelf. Behind the third row of novels, there's a small wooden box, the one my husband carved. Inside a key. Rusty, but still true. I kept it for sentimental reasons, for the story it carried. Funny how the past becomes a weapon when the present betrays you. My hands tremble as I fit the key into the small side door. It turns slow, stubborn, then clicks. Freedom sighs through the crack of light. I don't run. I stand there listening to the night breathe. I step outside. The cold air bites, but it feels honest. The moon spills silver across the sand, and the sea stretches out wild, untamed, unowned. I used to think this house was safety. Now I know it was my cage built not by walls but by faith in the wrong hands. I walk down to the water's edge. Each wave folds against my ankles like an old friend returning. The tide hums softly, steady, patient, and in that sound I find my pulse again. For the first time in years, I say my husband's name aloud. The wind carries it away as if returning it to where it belonged. I feel him near, not in the house, not in the past, but in the strength it takes to walk forward. I look back once. The porch light still burns faintly through the mist. That light has seen everything: birthdays, storms, laughter, betrayal. It refuses to die. So will I. They think silence means surrender, but silence remembers. It holds every promise broken, every kindness forgotten, and tonight it begins to speak again through me. I am Helen Monroe, and I have been locked away for the last time. The needle always hummed at night, that small silver rhythm rising and falling like a heartbeat made of light. Outside, winter pressed its face against the glass frost, drawing lace patterns I could never afford. The oil lamp trembled on the desk, its glow spilling over spools of thread and pale fabric. The room smelled of starch candle smoke and hope. Grace was asleep in the next room, or pretending to be. Children never really sleep when they've cried themselves tired. I could still hear the small hiccups in her breathing. She wanted a pink dress for her class party, the kind other girls had bought from shiny stores downtown. But all I had was an old bed sheet and a pair of hands that knew how to make something out of nothing. That night I stitched love into fabric. Every seam a prayer, every pull of the thread a promise. I was 29 then, a widow, a literature teacher who filled her evenings with extra tutoring and her mornings with coffee too weak to matter. I remember counting coins by the kitchen light, listening to the sound they made against the wooden table, that hollow clinking that tells you just how far a dream really is. When Grace came home that afternoon, her face was streaked with salt. She said, "It's okay, Mom. I don't need to go." But her eyes, they said otherwise. So I told her every girl deserves one moment to feel beautiful. Then I took the old bed sheet from the closet. Faded rose patterns, soft from years of washing. She frowned. "That's not a real dress." I smiled, though my chest ached. Not yet. The lamp burned late that night. Outside, the wind rattled the windows like a warning, but I just kept sewing. My fingers bled once or twice, the needle pricked, and I didn't even flinch. Because love, real love, doesn't notice pain while it's busy creating. I shaped sleeves from memory, a skirt that would twirl, and a little bow at the waist. It wasn't perfect, but it was pink, and it was hers. When dawn came, the room looked softer somehow, as if the sun itself had approved. I tiptoed into Grace's room, the dress folded across my arms. "Wake up, sweetheart," I whispered. She rubbed her eyes, still half lost in dreams. Then she saw it. Her gasp was small, but it filled every corner of that little house. "Is that for me?" I nodded. She touched the fabric like it might disappear if she pressed too hard. When she slipped it on the hem, brushed her knees uneven, the color catching light like morning blush. She twirled once, then again, laughing. And just like that, the whole world tilted back into place. I don't remember what she said after that. I just remember her smile, bright enough to melt the frost on every window. That was the moment I decided every sacrifice, every long night, every silence was worth it. Years have washed over that memory, but it never dulled. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel the warmth of her little hand on mine. I can still hear the fabric whispering under the needle. That sound became the soundtrack of our life together, soft, steady, unseen. After my husband passed, I promised myself one thing: Grace would never feel less than any other child. So I taught extra classes. I sold my wedding ring to cover her art supplies. I mended other people's clothes for pennies and told myself it was temporary. She was my chapter 2. The one I wanted to write right. There were times she'd look at me and say, "Mom, one day I'll buy you a real dress, a pink one just like this." And I'd laugh, pretending I didn't already have everything I wanted. "Only special people," I told her once, remember where they came from. She nodded so seriously, as if she'd just been handed a secret map to life. But children grow and maps fade. Looking back now, I see how that dress became more than fabric. It was a boundary stitched with love, a soft line between who we were and who she'd become. When she left for college, I folded it carefully and kept it in a cedar box. Not because I couldn't let go, but because I needed something that still carried her laughter. Some nights when the house felt too large, I'd open that box and touch the fabric again. It smelled faintly of her perfume, vanilla and rain. And I'd whisper into the quiet, "She did it, Henry. She really did it." Henry, my husband, would have been proud of her, of us. Now that same dress hangs in a wooden frame in my living room. The color has faded, the pink now closer to a whisper than a song, but the thread still holds. It always will. When I stand in front of it, I see more than a mother's sewing. I see every night I refused to give up. Every time I chose hope over hunger. Every page of my life written in fabric instead of ink. Silence remembers, I tell myself softly. It remembers the hum of the lamp, the sound of tiny scissors snipping the warmth of a girl twirling in joy. And maybe it remembers the woman I used to be, younger, braver, endlessly tired, but still believing that love could build a future. If I had known how much that little girl would change, how far she'd go, I might have sewn that dress even slower to make the moment last longer. But time has its own hands. It stitches too, just not always kindly. Still, whenever the sea wind passes through my window, I swear I can hear the thread pull through cloth again, that small, soft rhythm of love refusing to die. The pink dress was never just a dress. It was a promise. That even when the world forgets you, a mother's love will find a way to be seen. And someday when Grace remembers, she'll know. The real gift wasn't the dress. It was me quietly holding the needle, teaching her how to shine without needing permission. The smell of chalk never really leaves you. Even after 20 years, I can still feel the dust on my fingertips, fine as snow clinging to the skin, like memory itself. The classroom windows opened to a row of pines, and every autumn their needles scattered across the steps like small green letters. That was my life, the rhythm of bells, the hum of children repeating words they barely understood, and me trying to teach them what I once believed, that stories could save us. But life isn't a classroom. No one writes you the ending. You learn it slowly, one sacrifice at a time. I taught literature for 2 decades. My salary could barely keep the lights steady through winter. Yet somehow we made it work. Grace and I, a team of 2 women against the world. She'd sit in the back of my evening classes, drawing in her notebook, while I explained metaphors to half-asleep teenagers. When the lesson ended, she'd hand me a paper heart cut from an old magazine and say, "You talk too much, Mom." I did, because talking was the only way to keep silence from swallowing me. Silence remembers, it always does. Grace grew fast. By the time she turned 18, she already had a portfolio of sketches that looked like dreams made visible. She wanted to study design in Florence. When she told me, I laughed, not because I doubted her, but because I didn't know how we'd ever afford it. That night, I took out the small jewelry box from my dresser. Inside my wedding ring, gold worn thin with years of dishes, the circle dented from time. Henry gave it to me when we had nothing but a borrowed house and a promise to make it home. I held it under the lamp the way one might hold a memory too bright to look at. The next morning I sold it. Grace cried when she found out. I told her, "A ring is only metal, sweetheart. But a dream is flesh and breath." She hugged me so tight I could feel her heartbeat. And then she said something that has never left me. "One day I'll buy you a house by the sea." I smiled, but inside I whispered to the wind, "Don't let her forget." Florence took her far farther than I imagined. Letters came first, then emails, then photos of sunlit studios and marble staircases, too grand for the daughter of a schoolteacher. Her handwriting changed softer, rounded, like someone learning to belong to another world. Still she wrote, "I'm doing it, Mom. I'm really doing it." And she was. Her designs were featured in magazines. Clients called her visionary. I watched from my little kitchen in Maine, my hands still stained with chalk and ink, and thought, this is what pride feels like. A quiet ache that hurts so sweetly you welcome the pain. When she came home that summer, her clothes carried the scent of foreign perfume, something with citrus and money in it. She had a confidence I hadn't seen before, the kind that doesn't ask permission to shine. She took my hand and said, "Mom, it's time for you to have that house." At first, I thought she was joking, but a few months later, we stood before a weathered cottage overlooking the Atlantic. The porch creaked, the paint peeled, but the sea, oh, the sea was eternal. The house wasn't perfect, but neither was life, and I loved it instantly. Grace called it a gift of gratitude. I called it a promise kept. Every morning I'd drink coffee on that porch, watching the mist roll in like pages being turned by invisible hands. Sometimes when I closed my eyes, I could almost hear Henry's voice low and amused. "You did it, Helen. You really did it." But even then, beneath the joy, there was a whisper I couldn't name, a quiet unease. It began the day I met Daniel. He arrived at one of Grace's exhibitions, charming and polished, the kind of man who never seemed to sweat under pressure. He shook my hand with both of his, looked straight into my eyes, and said, "I've heard so much about you, Mrs. Monroe. Grace says you're the strongest woman she knows." Something in his smile didn't match his words. It was too perfect, like a painting signed by someone else. Grace glowed beside him. She looked happy, and happiness, real or not, was something I'd never dare question. So I told myself I was just being old-fashioned, too cautious, too protective. Love needs trust to breathe, doesn't it? So I trusted. Looking back now, I realize I gave away too many pieces of myself in the name of love. That house, that ring, those years, they were bricks in the foundation of a dream I built for her. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to leave space for me. I used to think motherhood meant surrender, that the measure of love was how much of yourself you could lose without complaint. But no one warns you if you give too much. Some people start believing you owe it. The night Grace moved in with Daniel, I walked along the shore until the tide reached my ankles. The sea was wild that evening, foam and fury tangled together. I let the waves wash over my feet and whispered, "She's safe now. She's happy." The stars above blinked like distant eyes. I wanted to believe they were watching over her. But the ocean said nothing. It only roared like it knew something I didn't. Even now, years later, when the wind howls against the windows of that same house, I hear that night calling back to me. The sea remembers the same way silence does. It remembers the woman who gave up her ring, who stitched her love into every sacrifice, who believed that trust could never be turned against her. And sometimes when I stand by the shore, I whisper to the waves, "I kept my promise, Grace. I hope you kept yours." The kettle always sang a little off-key in that kitchen, a small metallic cry before it settled into steam. Mornings there were polished white marble counters, sunlight bending through glass like it too wanted to please. Grace's laughter used to fill the space light and effortless until his voice began to shape the air around her. Daniel Monroe, the kind of man who made every room pause handsome, composed the sort who could make kindness sound like instruction. He called me Helen, never Mrs. Monroe, as if respect were optional, as if I were a chapter he'd already skimmed. He smiled when he spoke, always smiled, but behind that smile, there was heat. The first time I noticed it, we were setting the table for Sunday lunch. Grace had chosen a deep blue tablecloth, one her father loved. Daniel stood beside her, adjusting plates by millimeters. "Sweetheart," he said, "this shade clashes with the light. Let's use white next time." His tone was soft, instructional, and Grace just nodded. I remember laughing a little, trying to break the strange stillness that followed. "It's just a cloth, Daniel. The food will taste the same." He looked at me smiling, of course, but his eyes said something colder. "Presentation matters, Helen. You of all people should know that." The words landed lightly like dust. But dust, when left alone, always thickens. He was charming in public. Oh, he had everyone fooled. At dinner parties, he'd pull out chairs, refill glasses, speak just the right amount about art or property or charity. People called him the perfect husband. And Grace? She glowed under his hand on her back. But when the crowd disappeared, that same hand turned into a compass, always pointing her where he wanted her to go. He'd say things like, "You should let me handle the taxes," or, "You don't need to stress over clients, I'll talk to them." At first I thought it was love. After all, love does look a lot like protection in the beginning, but protection without trust becomes control. One evening I stayed for dinner, a rare invitation. Grace cooked her father's favorite dish, the kitchen warm with garlic and rosemary. She set a small bowl beside Daniel's plate, a simple salad, no dressing. He smiled. "You remembered? That's good." It sounded like praise, but his tone made me uneasy. Later, when Grace served dessert, a lemon tart she'd made herself, he placed his fork down before tasting it. "You used butter again, didn't you?" Her hands froze midair. He wasn't angry, that would have been easier. He was disappointed. Measured. "Sweetheart, we talked about this. You don't listen." The silence that followed was unbearable. So I spoke. "Daniel, it's just dessert. Let her enjoy it." He didn't even look at me. He just kept his eyes on Grace and said, "See? Even your mother doesn't understand moderation." Grace laughed awkwardly. "He's just teasing Mom." But I knew teasing when I heard it. This was training. After dinner, he walked me to the car. His smile never wavered. "Grace is lucky to have you," he said. "Not every mother would know when to step back." I smiled too, because that's what polite women do when they're being quietly warned. The drive home was long. The road curved along the coast, moonlight slicing the water into silver shards. I remember gripping the wheel too tightly, the echo of his voice filling the car. Not every mother would know when to step back. I had stepped back all my life for Grace, for peace, for love. But that night, for the first time, it didn't feel noble. It felt like disappearance. Weeks passed. Little things began to change. Grace stopped calling as often. When she did, Daniel always seemed to be in the background offering advice, correcting details. She'd laugh it off. "Oh, Mom, he just wants things perfect." But perfection is a quiet kind of prison. It doesn't scream, it smiles. I saw him cut her sentences short, rephrase her stories, as if her version were slightly off. I watched her hands fold neatly into her lap like a student afraid of saying the wrong thing. And every time I tried to speak to ask a question, Grace would sigh. "Mom, don't start. You're just too sensitive." Sensitive. That word had followed me all my life, as if feeling deeply were a flaw, as if intuition were something to apologize for. But silence remembers, and mine was beginning to burn. One evening, I found her sitting in the garden barefoot holding a wine glass that had gone warm. Her face looked tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from work. "Grace," I said softly, "are you happy?" She didn't answer. She just stared at the roses' petals scattered at her feet like fallen words. Finally, she whispered, "He loves me, Mom. He just wants me to do better." I wanted to tell her that love isn't about better. It's about being seen. But the words stayed behind my teeth. Because mothers learn early, some truths only destroy faster when spoken too soon. That night I couldn't sleep. The ocean outside my window sounded different, harder, restless, as if the tide itself were warning me. I stood by the window and thought about Grace as a little girl spinning in her pink dress, so proud, so free. And I realized that same girl was now living inside a life measured by someone else's approval. I pressed my hand to the glass, whispering into the dark, "Only special people remember where they came from." But the house gave no answer, just the slow hum of silence, the kind that watches and waits. Love built that house, but control had quietly moved in. And somewhere between the laughter and the lessons, I began to see it clearly, the truth Daniel never had to say out loud. He didn't want a wife. He wanted an audience. The crystal glasses caught the light like small cages of gold, the kind that hold reflections but never truth. Music drifted through the air, soft, expensive, rehearsed. Every note seemed to say, "Belong, behave, blend in." I stood near the edge of the room holding a glass of water, as if it could keep me anchored in that sea of wealth. Grace had outdone herself. The house was a masterpiece. Wide windows, ivory curtains, flowers that looked too perfect to be real. It smelled like lemon wax and success. She moved through her guests with that quiet, polished grace that used to be mine when I was younger, before grief bent my shoulders. But now, I was an afterthought, a relic placed carefully among the modern furniture. I shouldn't have come, but mothers always do. Daniel was everywhere that evening, shaking hands, laughing, performing generosity. Every sentence he spoke began with I. I wanted this architecture to feel timeless. I told Grace this design would attract the right people. I thought the chef could add a French twist. Grace nodded beside him, her smile precise, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. I couldn't find my daughter in that smile. When he saw me, he raised his glass. "Everyone, this is Helen, the woman who raised the most talented designer in Maine." The room applauded. It was kind, but not warm. I felt their curiosity like cold fingertips. "Who is she? Where does she fit in?" I smiled, of course. That's what women like me do. We learn to smile through hunger, through heartbreak, through erasure. Dinner was served under a chandelier that looked like it had fallen from heaven and decided to stay. Each dish was small, delicate, artistic, the kind of food you photograph, not eat. I could hear laughter all around, but every laugh felt rehearsed, as if no one wanted to be the first to sound real. Daniel sat at the head of the table, Grace beside him, radiant but still. And me. Halfway down between strangers who spoke about markets and property values, they asked polite questions. "So, Helen, you used to teach?" I nodded. "Literature." One man smiled vaguely. "Ah, lovely. My wife reads sometimes." They laughed. I didn't. So I looked toward Grace, hoping she'd meet my eyes. But she was busy pouring Daniel more wine. Later during dessert, lemon custard on porcelain plates that weighed less than guilt, someone asked about Grace's inspiration. She began to speak, but Daniel's hand brushed hers. "I'll tell the story," he said. "She grew up with nothing, just her mother, in a small old house by the sea. I've seen it. Charming, but terribly outdated. I told her once those old things just anchor you to the past." Everyone laughed, except me. The air thickened. It was as if the chandelier's light turned cruel. Grace looked down her fork, resting motionless. She didn't correct him. She didn't say that the sea house was her dream, our dream, that we built it out of promises, not profit. I said softly, "That old house still stands, Daniel. Some dreams don't need to be replaced." He smiled that patient, polished smile of his. "Of course, Helen. But the future has to breathe, doesn't it?" The room hummed in agreement. Polite nods, polite distance. And in that moment, I felt myself vanish, not loudly, not tragically, but in the quiet way a candle dies when no one's watching. Grace finally looked up. Our eyes met across the table. Hers said, "Please don't make this worse." Mine said, "Please remember who you are." She looked away first. So I sat there, hands folded in my lap, pretending the lemon tasted sweet, pretending the ache in my chest was just indigestion. Silence wrapped itself around me, and I let it, because silence remembers. After dinner, the guests drifted toward the terrace, their laughter scattering like pearls on marble. I stayed behind, watching the candles melt into small pools of wax. Daniel approached his glass half empty, his confidence full. "You didn't enjoy yourself, Helen," he said almost kindly. "I did. I lied. It's a beautiful home." He nodded, pleased. "You see, Grace deserves this. She doesn't need to live under the shadow of an old house or old stories." Old stories. That's what I was now, an outdated tale, too sentimental to matter. He left before I could answer. Maybe he already knew my silence was stronger than my words. I found Grace outside under the soft white lights. The night smelled of salt and money. She was standing near the balcony, her arms crossed her face, unreadable. "Grace," I said quietly, "do you remember the sea house? The pink curtains, the shell lamp your father fixed?" She smiled, but it was the kind of smile people use to end conversations. "Mom, don't." Daniel just meant, "I know what he meant," I said. "I just wanted to know if you remember." She hesitated. "Then, Mom, don't be so sentimental. It's just a house." Just a house. That phrase hit harder than any insult, because it wasn't about the walls. It was about everything inside them. Laughter loss, late night sewing, and survival. I looked at her, at the woman I had raised, and realized the world had built her a palace, but stolen her roots. Driving home that night, the road blurred between tears and headlights. The sea was dark, restless, calling in a language I used to understand. When I reached my little house, I turned on the porch light. It flickered, as it always did, but it stayed lit, stubborn, loyal, like an old friend refusing to give up. I sat there for a long time, listening to the wind move through the grass. The night felt heavy with things unsaid. Only special people remember where they came from. I whispered that line into the dark, hoping it might find her somehow, hoping she'd hear it one day when the laughter fades and the silence begins to speak again. Rain had been falling since morning. Not a storm, just a steady, patient drizzle, the kind that seeps into wood and memory alike. The air smelled of salt and paper. Through the window, the sea was a sheet of pewter flat, endless and tired. I was sitting at the kitchen table, folding laundry I'd already folded twice, when I heard the knock. 3 polite taps, measured, predictable. That's how Daniel always entered a room, as if he already owned it. He came in, smiling, a smile practiced enough to be gentle, but never warm. "Good morning, Helen," he said, shaking the rain from his sleeves. He placed a folder on the table, neat, deliberate, like an offering. "Just some tax paperwork," he explained. "For your peace of mind. It'll make things easier if the house is in my name. Temporary, of course." His voice was low, persuasive, almost kind. The kind of voice that tells you he's already decided for you. I looked at the folder. Brown, clean, unremarkable. But somehow, it pulsed, like something alive. Grace appeared behind him, her face bright and anxious. She carried that same nervous smile she used to wear before exams. "Mom," she said softly, "Daniel just wants to help with the paperwork. He knows these things better than we do." "We." That word stung. I hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd said "you and me." I turned to her. Her eyes were pleading not for the papers, but for peace. For me not to make a scene. Daniel opened the folder, and the scent of ink and damp paper filled the air. He slid a document toward me, one signature line waiting like a snare. "It's just a transfer for management," he said. Grace and I want to protect this place. You'll still live here, of course. Nothing changes, Helen. Nothing changes. He said it like a lullaby, but I could feel the shift beneath my skin, a quiet hum of danger. The kind that comes not from noise, but from too much calm. I asked, and what happens after I sign? He smiled again. Then everything will be simpler. Grace's voice cut in soft and trembling. Mom, please. He's doing this for you. I looked at her, my daughter, the little girl who once spun in a pink dress, laughing as the hem caught sunlight. Now her shoulders were tense, her gaze anchored to him, and I knew I was outnumbered in my own kitchen. My pen felt heavier than it should. I hesitated. Daniel leaned closer, his tone feathered with patience. Helen, you've worked hard your whole life. Let us take care of you now. Take care. That phrase so gentle, so deadly. I signed. The ink spread like a bruise across the page. A small sound escaped me, half sigh, half surrender. Grace exhaled in relief. Daniel closed the folder with a satisfied click. There, he said. That wasn't so hard. No, not hard, just irreversible. After they left, the house felt different, not emptier, just quieter, as if it knew it belonged to someone else now. I walked through each room slowly, the smell of old books in the study. Henry's photograph on the mantel, the worn spot on the floor where Grace took her first steps. Everything still in its place, but none of it mine. In the bedroom, the rain had stopped. A thin light filtered through the curtains, touching the picture of Henry, his eyes kind, steady. I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, I did it for her. But even as I said it, the words felt wrong, because love, when used as an excuse for surrender, turns into something else, something smaller, something that eats you from the inside out. That night I couldn't sleep. The sea outside was restless waves slapping against the rocks like an argument. I tried to read, but the words swam. Every sound in the house felt louder, the hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock, the whisper of guilt. I imagined Grace telling Daniel how grateful she was, how relieved her mother had finally agreed. And maybe he'd nod that smug, quiet nod of victory, a man who thinks he's saved the world when all he's done is claimed it. Somewhere around midnight, I got up and went to the desk. The folder was still there. I opened it and stared at my name beside his. It didn't look like ownership. It looked like erasure. The paper had a faint warmth under my fingertips, as if the ink still remembered the moment it became permanent. I wanted to tear it to undo the choice I'd made out of love and fear, but instead, I closed it again. Because silence remembers, and sometimes silence is the only witness left. Morning came pale and cold. Grace called her voice light. Mom, thank you again for trusting us. Daniel's taking care of everything now. I said, I know, and she said, you'll see it's better this way. Better. The word burned, but I let it pass, because arguing would only widen the gap between the woman she became and the one I raised. When she hung up, I stood by the window watching the horizon where the water met the sky. The color was the same dull gray as the ink on that paper, and for the first time I understood something I'd never said aloud. Love can blind you so deeply that when you open your eyes again, everything you loved has already changed hands. I sat back at the kitchen table, the same place it had all begun. The folder was gone now. Daniel had taken it with him, but the ghost of it lingered. You can't wash away betrayal when it's written in your own handwriting. I traced my fingers along the grain of the table and whispered to the empty air, enough. The word felt strange in my mouth, small, defiant, alive. It didn't erase what I'd lost, but it reminded me that silence could still become strength, and that someday, when the rain stopped for good, I would find a way to take back my name. Autumn came early that year. The sea wind carried the smell of pine and rain, and the evenings grew shorter, quieter, lonelier. I remember standing by the porch, watching leaves gather under the lamppost, little scraps of gold that no one claimed. The phone used to ring every few days. Now, weeks passed. Grace's voice, once bright and certain, came only through short calls filled with apologies. Sorry, Mom, work's been madness. Or Daniel and I are traveling this weekend. The line would crackle, and then the silence after long, heavy, like a door closing softly somewhere far away. Time, I've learned, doesn't just move forward. It peels you back, layer by layer, until all that's left is who you were before anyone needed you. I filled my days again the old-fashioned way. Mornings with books and coffee. Afternoons teaching literature to children at the community hall, kids who still believed words could change things. Their laughter was unguarded, pure as sunlight on wet pavement. One boy, Sam, always stayed after class. He'd ask about metaphors, why poets compared love to weather or fire. I told him, because both can warm you, and both can destroy. He smiled like he understood, but no one that young ever really does. When the classroom emptied, I'd linger rearranging chalk, listening to the echo of chairs scraping across the floor. Those small sounds made me feel less erased. Evenings were for the garden. The marigolds had wilted, but the roses refused to give up. I liked that about them, their stubbornness. I'd trim the stems, whisper to the soil, pretend someone was listening. Inside the house had its own rhythm, now a kettle that hissed too long, a clock that ticked too loud, a floorboard that groaned under memory. And on the wall above the mantel, hung inside a wooden frame, was the pink dress. The light caught it differently at dusk, sometimes gold, sometimes gray. It wasn't just fabric. It was breath stitched with all the love I had left. I'd stand there looking at it, feeling that same strange ache I'd felt the day Grace wore it for the first time. Back then it had meant pride. Now it meant distance. Grace did visit once that winter. She arrived in a coat too elegant for the season, the kind that said more about Daniel than about her. Her perfume filled the room before her voice did. "Mom," she said brightly, "I brought you those teas you like." We sat by the fire, the kettle whistling between us like a nervous guest. She talked about clients' deadlines, the new kitchen remodel. I listened, nodding at the right moments, counting the silences in between. Finally I asked, "How are you, Grace?" She blinked. "I just told you busy but good." "No," I said quietly, "I mean you." For a second her face faltered. Then she looked away. "Daniel takes care of me. You don't have to worry." That sentence, the same one I'd used once about Henry, the same lie wrapped in comfort. She stayed an hour, then her phone buzzed, and she left a blur of perfume heels clicking on the porch, a promise to visit again soon. The house felt smaller after the door closed, or maybe I did. Days blended. Letters came from the library asking if I'd lead another class. I said yes, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to fill the hours. Old age is just a slow conversation with yourself, and I'd already learned how sharp silence can be. Sometimes neighbors stopped by with soup or gossip. They meant well, but their kindness had weight, the kind that reminds you you're alone. At night, I'd pour a small cup of wine, sit by the window, and let the sea talk. It was the only voice that never lied, always restless, always true. I thought of Grace often, not in anger that had burned out long ago, but in ache, a steady, pulsing ache that comes from loving someone who's forgotten how to listen. One afternoon, while dusting the shelves, I found an old photograph wedged between books. Grace at 6 missing teeth cheeks, flushed, holding that pink dress up to the camera like a trophy. Behind her, I could see my younger self smiling, hopeful, the kind of woman who still believed love was enough. I pressed the photo to my chest. "Only special people remember where they came from," I whispered, but she didn't, at least not yet. There's a strange peace in routine. You begin to live in smaller circles, books, garden, tea, sleep, as if the world shrinks to the size of what still needs you. I thought I was at peace, but sometimes at twilight when the wind slipped through the cracks in the window, I'd hear faint laughter Grace's when she was little echoing somewhere between memory and air. That's when I knew peace and loneliness aren't opposites, they're neighbors. I kept teaching. The children began calling me Miss Helen, though I told them I'd retired long ago. On the last day before Christmas break, Sam gave me a seashell he'd found on the beach. "It sounds like the ocean," he said. When I held it to my ear, I heard nothing. Just silence. But silence remembers. It always does. That night I placed the shell beside the pink dress. 2 witnesses, both shaped by what they'd lost. Winter deepened. The roses outside finally surrendered to frost. The phone didn't ring anymore. I thought maybe this is how life prepares you, not with sudden endings, but with fading. 1 call less, 1 visit skipped, until quiet feels like the only language left. Still each evening I lit a small lamp by the window. A habit I couldn't explain. Maybe I hoped Grace might drive by one night, see the light, and remember. Maybe love is just that, keeping a light burning even when you know no one's coming home. The wind that morning was colder than usual. It came in through the window, carrying the sea's breath, sharp, metallic, alive. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the teacup trembling slightly in my hands. The spoon slipped, and the sound of porcelain against wood echoed too loud in the small room. The fever had been building all night. It came in waves, heat and cold, chasing each other through my bones. Every breath burned. Every heartbeat felt borrowed. I reached for the phone. The screen lit up my face in the dim light. I pressed Grace's name. The ringing filled the silence, once, twice, then voicemail. Her voice, bright and recorded, said, "Hey, it's Grace, leave a message." I whispered, "It's Mom, I'm not well," then hung up. An hour passed, no call back, so I tried again. Still nothing. Then a message appeared, not from her, but from him. "Grace is in a meeting. Take your medicine and rest." That was all. No question, no warmth, just instruction. For a moment I stared at the words the way one stares at a stranger's handwriting, familiar letters, but no soul behind them. The house felt larger somehow, each room echoing back its emptiness. The clock ticked too loudly. The kettle hissed, then went quiet. I waited not for a call, but for a feeling. The one that tells you still matter to someone. It never came. By evening, my body shook with fever. I couldn't stand without the walls holding me up. The light outside turned blue, that strange, tender color between day and night. I pulled a blanket over my shoulders and lay down on the couch, listening to the sea. A knock startled me, 3 quick taps. Then her voice, Mrs. Coleman, my neighbor. "Helen, you didn't come out today, you all right?" I opened the door just enough to see her face worried, kind too kind. She held a small pot of soup steam curling from its lid. "I heard you coughing last night," she said. "I made chicken in time. Sit down before you fall." I wanted to tell her I was fine, but my voice betrayed me. It came out cracked thin, tired. She fussed over me, setting the bowl on the table, tidying things that didn't need tidying. The smell of soup filled the house, garlic, rosemary care. "Grace not answering again?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "She's busy." Mrs. Coleman sighed. "Busy comes easy when you're young. But you shouldn't be alone, dear." After she left, the silence returned, but this time it felt different. Not empty, just honest. That night, I sat by the window, the soup untouched. The fever blurred everything, and through the glass the world tilted sky and sea, trading places. I thought about Grace as a child, her small hands pressing wildflowers into books, the way she used to call out, "Mom, look, I found another one." And now I couldn't even get her to pick up the phone. That's when I understood I had become inconvenient. A task too small to fit into her new life, a mother who no longer fit the frame. It wasn't cruelty, it was erasure. The kind that happens slowly, like fog swallowing a coastline. I must have fallen asleep. When I woke, the house was dark. The fever had broken, but sweat clung to my skin. Somewhere the tide was rising. I went to the mirror lit by the faint light from the porch. The woman staring back wasn't the Helen I remembered. Her eyes were softer, but something in them had sharpened a quiet decision forming in the space where pain had lived too long. I whispered to my reflection, "Enough." It wasn't loud, but the word carried weight. It felt like the first step on dry land after too much sea. The next morning, the air smelled clean. The fever was gone, but something else had shifted inside me, a stillness like the moment before a storm decides to break. Grace didn't call. Neither did Daniel, and for once I didn't wait. I opened the curtains wide. Light spilled in, illuminating the pink dress on the wall. It glowed faintly in the morning sun, its fabric whispering through time. I thought of every moment I'd spent trying to stay soft, to be the gentle mother, the forgiving woman, the one who didn't make things harder. But softness, I realized, had turned me invisible. Silence remembers, yes, but silence also learns. And that morning, mine had learned to speak again. Mrs. Coleman stopped by with tea. She said, "You look better today." "I am," I told her. "I just needed rest." But what I meant was I needed distance from the ache of waiting for someone who'd already chosen elsewhere. When she left, I stood by the window watching the horizon. The sea shimmered blue and endless and free. I thought maybe it's time to live like that, unbound, unafraid. The pink dress swayed slightly in the draft. It looked almost alive, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see loss in it. I saw a beginning. That night, I didn't call Grace. I didn't check my phone. I didn't listen for the sound of her voice. Instead, I opened the back door, let the wind rush through, and breathed. The air tasted of salt and freedom. I wasn't angry anymore, just awake. And in that quiet, I finally said the truth aloud to no one and to everyone. I am not a burden. I am the woman who built this home, who stitched the pink dress, who kept the light on. The sea answered, as it always does, not with words, but with rhythm, a sound older than grief. And I knew then, whatever comes next, I would not disappear quietly. The morning light entered softly through the curtains, thin and colorless like paper left too long in the sun. The fever was gone. My body felt lighter, but something else deeper had shifted. I moved slowly through the house, noticing dust where there shouldn't be dust, the faint smell of salt trapped in the wooden floors and the sound of the sea pressing gently against the shore. It was the same house I'd lived in for years, but that day, it looked like a stranger. Maybe that's what happens when the truth starts to whisper. I decided to clean properly for once. Every drawer, every corner, every memory. The broom scraped against the floorboards, and each sweep seemed to unearth more than just dust. I found old letters, postcards, receipts, tiny pieces of life that had been tucked away and forgotten. Then, in the desk drawer of Henry's old study beneath a stack of faded utility bills, I found a folder. The paper inside was crisp, newer than the others, and on the top, in bold black letters, Property Transfer Agreement. For a moment I didn't breathe. I turned the first page, and there it was, his name. Daniel Monroe. Not mine, not ours, his. I sat down. The floor felt cold through my slippers. Outside, waves broke in a steady rhythm, like a heart that refused to care if you were listening. I read every word, every cruel professional word, the signatures the notary stamped the witness line with Grace's neat handwriting. There it was, the whole story written in ink, not betrayal with shouting or slammed doors, just betrayal written neatly on legal paper. I didn't cry. There were no tears left for this kind of theft, only stillness. And stillness when you've lived long enough is far heavier than grief. I thought about the day I'd signed it. Daniel's calm smile, Grace's nervous laugh, my trembling hand, how I'd told myself it was love, that trust was proof of devotion. But trust, when given to the wrong hands, is just permission to disappear. I stared at the sea through the window, gray light flashing across the water, and I whispered, "Enough." The sound of it startled me low, certain steady. Not anger, not despair. Something else. Something alive. By afternoon, I had pulled out an old notebook, the kind Henry used to keep his lesson plans in. Its pages smelled faintly of pencil dust and cedar. I began to write. Names, dates, documents, everything I could remember about that day. Every word Daniel had said. Every moment Grace had looked away. I didn't know what I would do with it yet. But I knew one thing: I would not stay quiet anymore. Silence had served them well. It had kept me small, invisible, obedient. But silence also remembers. It stores everything. The tone, the look, the lies, the moment you almost spoke and didn't. And someday it tells its story back to you. That night I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Martin Blake, our old lawyer. His voice was older now, gravelly, but still carried that quiet steadiness I remembered. "Helen," he said, surprised, "it's been ages." I told him I'd found something, that I needed his help. He hesitated. "You're sure you want to go down this road?" "I'm sure," I said, and I was. He promised to visit the next day to look over the papers. Before hanging up, he added softly, "I always told Henry you had a lion's heart." After the call, I sat there for a long while listening to the sea again. This time, it didn't sound mournful. It sounded like applause. The next morning, I opened the curtains fully. The sun poured in, brighter, bolder, unapologetic. I tidied the table, arranged the documents neatly, and brewed tea, though I knew I wouldn't drink it. When I looked around, the house no longer felt foreign. It felt alert, as if the walls themselves were waiting. I smiled to myself. Let them think I was still weak, still sick, still the quiet old woman they could manipulate. That was the advantage of being underestimated. You could hide your strength in plain sight. That evening, Grace called. Her voice was casual, almost rehearsed. "Mom, Daniel says you should rest more. You don't need to worry about bills or papers. We're taking care of everything." I let her speak. I didn't interrupt. When she finally paused, I said, "I know, sweetheart." And I did know all of it now. The illusion, the manipulation, the soft cage they'd built lined with comfort and control. When I hung up, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was strong. It hummed with purpose. Later that night, I stood by the framed pink dress again. Its color had faded a little less rose, more memory. Still, it glowed in the lamplight. I remembered the night I sewed it, the sound of the needle, the heat of the lamp, Grace asleep beside me. I remembered thinking, this is what love is giving until there's nothing left. But now I saw it differently. Love wasn't giving everything away. Love was knowing when to stop. "Only special people," I whispered, "remember where they came from." And I smiled, not in sadness, but in understanding. When I finally sat down at my desk, the sea was whispering again, its rhythm steady like breath. I began to write one final line in my notebook. They think I'm alone, but silence remembers, and silence has a witness. I closed the cover, gently set it beside the lamp, and let the night settle around me. Outside, the waves struck the shore with quiet persistence. Each one sounded like a promise. And for the first time in years, I felt no fear. Because truth, when it finally wakes, doesn't ask for permission. It just stands. The sea was quiet that evening. Too quiet. The kind of silence that hides something underneath. The invitation came through Grace, her voice light, almost rehearsed. Daniel thought we could all have dinner together. Just family. Just family. 2 words that once meant comfort. Now they sounded like bait. I put on a navy blue dress, simple clean, the same one I'd worn the day Grace graduated. Funny how certain clothes remember things better than people do. When I arrived, the house was glowing soft light in crystal glasses, the smell of lemon and roasted lamb. Everything perfect, almost cinematic. But perfection, I've learned, is just a mask for control. Grace greeted me with that polite warmth she'd learned from him, the kind that shines in company and fades in privacy. Daniel poured wine, his sleeves rolled neatly, his smile measured. "Helen," he said, "we're so glad you could make it. You look wonderful." His charm was like polished glass, beautiful but sharp if you held it too long. We sat. The table shimmered with silver and the kind of silence that eats through air. He began with small talk: property values, travel plans, Grace's new clients. I nodded, listening like a guest in someone else's play. Then he reached under the table, pulled out a thin folder, and slid it toward me. "Just one more paper, Helen," he said softly. "After this, everything will be settled." I looked at it. A new agreement, another transfer, the final detail, he called it. Grace smiled weakly. "Mom, Daniel just wants to make things simple for everyone." Simple. That word again. It's what people use when they want you to stop thinking. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled not from fear, but from the effort of pretending. "I'll look it over tomorrow," I said. He leaned forward, his eyes thin as wire. "Helen," he said quietly, "this really needs to be done tonight." I set the pen down. "Tomorrow," I repeated. Something flickered in his face, a shadow of impatience quickly buried beneath the same pleasant tone. "Of course, tomorrow." He smiled again, too wide, too calm. Then he stood refilling my glass, though I hadn't asked. The wine spilled slightly, and a single drop slid across the white tablecloth like blood down marble. The rest of the meal was an act. Grace talked about Italy. Daniel laughed too loudly at his own jokes. I played my part, the aging mother, grateful for the invitation, too gentle to see through the curtain. But I saw. Every glance, every cue, every calculation behind his soft voice. When the plates were cleared, I thanked them both. Daniel walked me to the door, his hand on my shoulder, a gesture that looked kind but felt like a command. "Sleep well, Helen," he said. His breath smelled of wine and victory. I smiled. "You too, Daniel." Then I left. The night air hit my face like truth. At home, the first thing I did was close every window. Then I sat at my desk, pulled the small recorder from my purse, and pressed play. The sound of dinner filled the room, forks clinking, Grace's nervous laugh, Daniel's voice calm and careful. Then the line, his voice lower now, the mask off. "If she doesn't sign, we'll make her. There are ways. She's old, it won't take much pressure." I listened again and again. The words didn't change, but what they did inside me did. I wasn't afraid anymore. Fear had done its job. Now it was time for something cleaner. The next morning, I went to the notary office, then to the courthouse archives. I copied documents, recorded dates, and gathered everything I needed, every line of deceit, every transaction hidden under care. It's remarkable how easy it is to untangle a web once you stop pretending you're not caught in it. By evening, my folder was full. Evidence, proof, freedom in paper form. When I returned home, I made tea chamomile with honey and sat by the window as the sun dipped into the water. The house felt different, lighter. Not because anything had changed yet, but because I had. For years, I thought survival meant peacekeeping, that keeping quiet meant safety. But silence doesn't keep you safe. It only keeps you small. Silence remembers, and sometimes silence records. Grace called that night. Her voice was soft. "Mom, did you get home all right?" "Yes," I said. It was a lovely dinner. I could hear Daniel's voice faintly in the background, directing, prompting, guiding. Then Grace said Daniel wanted to ask if you looked over the paper yet. "I did," I answered, "and I've decided not to sign anything until my lawyer reviews it." Silence. Pure, sharp silence on the other end. Then a muffled whisper, Daniel's voice again. Grace spoke finally. "Mom, you don't need a lawyer, Daniel." "Daniel," I interrupted, "isn't my husband. He's my son-in-law, and he'll wait." I hung up before she could respond. The click echoed through the room like the end of a song. I sat back in the armchair, the recorder still playing softly, his voice repeating over and over. "If she doesn't sign, don't blame me for being harsh." The sound no longer hurt. It fueled me. It clarified things. It stripped the illusion of family down to its truth. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't even pray. I just watched the sea breathe, in, out, unbroken. And I whispered to the dark, "He thinks he's hunting a mouse, but the trap isn't for me." The next morning I walked to the police station. The evidence sat heavy in my bag, but my steps were light. Even the air felt new. I wasn't the frightened woman he'd built. I was the storm he'd trained without realizing it. As I crossed the street, the wind rose from the water, cold, fierce, alive. For the first time in years, I smiled without effort, because the war was no longer hidden. And this time, the silence was on my side. The morning of the hearing smelled like rain and iron, the kind of scent that tells you the world is about to change. I stood by the window as dawn broke, watching the light spill across the sea, slow, deliberate, like truth uncovering what had long been hidden. Somewhere down the street, a car door shut, then another. Uniformed footsteps approached my porch. I didn't flinch when the knock came. The sound was sharp, final, like punctuation. When I opened the door, the officers nodded. Their expressions were neutral, practiced. One of them held a folded document. "Mrs. Monroe," he said softly, "we have a warrant." I simply stepped aside. "Then you'd better do what you came to do." They went straight to Daniel's house, not running, not shouting, just moving with quiet purpose. By the time the sun rose fully, the news had already found its way online. His name, his company, the words "financial exploitation of an elder," and the photo Daniel Monroe, once the golden man of our little town, now walking out of his home in handcuffs. I didn't watch the live feed. But later, Mrs. Coleman told me the whole street went silent. Even the sea seemed to pause. Was it revenge, she asked. No, I told her. It was correction. Court was held 3 weeks later. The walls smelled of paper and old dust, and the ceiling fans turned lazily above us, as if tired of seeing people pretend they were good. Grace was there. She sat on the other side of the aisle, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes red from sleeplessness or guilt. I couldn't tell which. When Daniel entered, he still had that faint smile, the one that said, "I can talk my way out of this." He even nodded toward me as though we were co-stars in some elegant misunderstanding. But the evidence, the recordings, the contracts, the careful, patient truth, they didn't care for charm. They just existed, solid, inarguable. When it was my turn to speak, the microphone caught the tremor in my breath. Still, I stood straight. "I'm not here," I said, "to destroy anyone. I'm here to remember myself." The prosecutor asked me to describe what had happened. The dinners, the papers, the manipulation disguised as kindness. I told it plainly. No tears, no theatrics. At one point, Daniel interrupted. "She's exaggerating. She doesn't even understand the law." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Monroe, you'll have your turn." He sat back, jaw tight, eyes burning with something that used to be power. Grace covered her mouth, and for a moment the entire room smelled of fear. His fear, the scent of a man who'd finally met consequence. When it was over, the judge asked if I had anything else to say. I turned to Grace. She was shaking. Her lips trembled, and her voice, when it came, was small. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you just say something?" I held her gaze. "I did, Grace. You just weren't listening. It wasn't cruelty. It was truth, plain and unpolished. The kind that lands quietly and stays." She began to cry. Not the kind of cry that asks for forgiveness. The kind that finally understands what it costs to earn it. When court adjourned, I walked outside into a light that felt almost holy. The air was crisp, alive. Reporters called my name. I didn't answer. I had already said everything that needed saying. At the courthouse steps, I stopped and looked up. The clouds had opened and sunlight streamed through in ribbons, gold soft, endless. Someone behind me whispered, "There she is, the woman who fought back." I smiled faintly. No, not fought back, just stood up. Because sometimes standing is enough. That evening I went home to the house by the sea, the same house they had tried to take. It felt different now, lighter, almost grateful. I brewed tea, sat in the quiet, listened to the sea's long, steady rhythm. The framed pink dress caught the last light of dusk. It glowed faintly the way memories glow when they finally find peace. I traced the edge of the frame with my finger and whispered, "We made it, didn't we?" The walls didn't answer, but they seemed to breathe with me. Later that night, Grace came. No phone call, no warning. She just stood on the porch, eyes swollen, hair uncombed, holding nothing but silence. I opened the door. She didn't step in, not yet. She looked at me like someone searching for a word that doesn't exist anymore. Then finally said, "I don't know how to fix it." I took her hand. "You start," I said, "by not letting someone else write your story." Her fingers tightened around mine. And in that moment, for the first time in years, she was my daughter again. The next morning, the paper headline read, "Justice by the Sea." I cut it out, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the same notebook where I had first written Daniel's name. I closed the cover, looked out toward the ocean, and whispered the words that had carried me here. Silence remembers. Because it does. And when the time comes, silence speaks, not in anger, but in light. The sea is gentler now. It hums instead of roars. Each wave folds into the next like a breath long exhaled. Morning light drapes across the porch, and the air smells of salt and old wood warmed by sun. The kind of morning that asks for stillness, not plans. I sit in my old wicker chair, the one Henry mended its armrest still smooth from his hands. The house creaks softly behind me, settling into peace the way a heart does after a long storm. For the first time in years, it belongs to me again. Not just by law, but by quiet, steady truth. It took months for the papers to come through. So many signatures, so many stamps, as if justice required ceremony to be real. The day they handed me the deed, I didn't cry. I just traced my name with a fingertip, Helen Monroe, and thought, so this is what coming home feels like. People in town still whisper. Some call me brave, some call me cruel, but I don't correct them. Truth doesn't need an audience to exist, it just needs light. The evenings here are my favorite. The wind moves through the dunes carrying the scent of pine and seagrass. At dusk, the gulls go quiet, and the porch light flickers to life, automatic faithful. That soft glow is my promise to myself, to never live in the dark again. Grace came back last night. No warning, just the sound of her car crunching against the gravel and then silence. I heard her before I saw her, her hesitant steps on the path, the breath she gathered at the door. When I opened it, she looked older somehow, not by years, but by understanding. She didn't speak, neither did I. Sometimes words only bruise what's already healing. She stepped inside slowly, her eyes searching the room, the framed photographs, the books, the familiar walls she hadn't touched in so long. Then she noticed the pink dress. It still hung in its wooden frame, bathed in the glow of the afternoon sun. She walked to it, her hand trembling slightly as she traced the glass. Then she turned back to me, and for the first time in years her voice cracked open. I kept it all this time, she whispered. The frame, the glass, the memory, but it belongs here. She placed it gently on the table. No apology, no explanations, just truth bare and human. We stood there for a while, two women bound by blood and mistakes, each trying to forgive herself for what silence had stolen. Finally, I said, I still keep the light on, in case you ever need to find your way back. Her lips trembled, not quite a smile, not quite a cry, just the fragile beginning of something new. She nodded once, then turned toward the door. As she walked down the steps, the sea wind caught her hair. For a second, I saw her the way she looked at 6 barefoot, laughing the pink dress twirling under the summer sun. And for that second, everything felt whole again. After she left, I made tea and sat on the porch. Steam rose like tiny ghosts in the cool air. The light from the lamp beside me flickered, then steadied, as if refusing to dim. I thought about all the rooms I'd sat in over the years, waiting for someone to listen, waiting for someone to understand. And I realized the one person I'd waited for was myself. There is a kind of freedom that doesn't come from victory, but from peace, from knowing you've survived without becoming what hurt you. Silence remembers, but forgiveness decides what stays. The sky darkened slowly, turning from gold to violet to deep blue. The tide whispered secrets only the shore could hear. And as the stars began to appear, I whispered one too. I forgive you, Grace, and I forgive me. It wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about release. The porch light glowed against the night, small, steady, unafraid. It reached across the yard, across the years, across everything that had once felt lost. And I thought this is what love should have been all along, not ownership, not obedience, but light, guiding without demanding. Sometimes the neighbors ask why I never turn the porch light off. I tell them it's for the tide, so it always knows where home is. But the truth, it's for Grace, and maybe for me too. A reminder that no matter how far we drift, there's a place that still holds warmth. Only special people, I once said, remember where they came from. Now I know it's not memory that makes you special. It's courage, the courage to return. The night air grows cooler now. The sea sighs, the porch wood creaks beneath my feet, and somewhere inside me a door closes softly, not in sorrow but in peace. I sip the last of my tea, feeling its warmth spread through me like truth. And in the rhythm of the waves, I hear my life whisper back. Tình yêu không có tôn trọng là giam cầm. And I have had enough. The light hums beside me, faithful, forgiving forever. Yes, the porch light still burns.